Have you ever just felt adrift? Like you're missing some kind of map for life. Well, let's dive into this, because the existential psychologist Rollo had a really fascinating theory about why so many of us feel that way. He basically argued that we're all suffering from a deep, collective hunger for something we've totally lost: myths. So today, we're going to unpack what he really meant by that.
I mean, it's a huge question, right? It seems to be everywhere in our culture. May saw this rising tide of anxiety and just plain meaninglessness in the Western world, and he was pretty sure he knew why. He saw us as a society that had systematically, piece by piece, dismantled its guiding stories, leaving this huge void in their place.
And this is what he called the cry for myth. And we're not talking about a quiet little whimper. He saw it as this urgent, almost desperate need. May was convinced that without these foundational stories, our culture is in some serious trouble, just searching for meaning in all the wrong places.
Now, what's really interesting here is how May diagnosed our attempts to fill that gap. He argued that things like the pull of cults, the escape you find in drug addiction, or even our obsession with celebrities and pop culture, they're all just symptoms. They're these kind of desperate attempts to find the deep, unifying meaning that myths used to provide for us almost automatically.
Okay, but to really get his point, we have to completely reset how we think about the word myth. Because, when we hear it, we immediately think of falsehoods, or maybe some ancient, irrelevant story. But May argued that this is a profound misunderstanding. For him, a myth wasn't a lie at all. It was something much, much more fundamental to how we make sense of our world.
So here's the crucial point. For May, myths are not lies. They are the fundamental belief systems, the ones we're aware of and the ones we're not, that give our lives a framework. They're the stories that help us make sense of ourselves, our society, and our place in this whole big universe.
And this quote just illustrates his idea so brilliantly. I mean, think about it. You don't see the support beams holding up your house, but without them, the whole thing just collapses. May said our personal and cultural myths work in exactly the same way. They're the invisible structures holding our entire reality together.
May believed we're always communicating on two different levels. So on one level, you've got rationalistic language. That's all about facts, data, where getting it right is everything. But on a much deeper level, we communicate through myths and symbols. And that language isn't about being factually correct. It's about capturing the total human experience. It's the language we use when we're really searching for who we are.
So, to make this idea a bit more concrete, May used this incredibly powerful case study, the ancient Greek myth of Oedipus. He argued that this story has stuck around for thousands of years, not because it's some quaint piece of history, but because it perfectly maps onto the core crises of every single human life.
He broke the myth down into these 5 universal stages. And just think about it for a second. Birth, separating from our parents, dealing with those complex family dynamics, the lifelong search for who we actually are, and then finally, facing our own mortality. These aren't just Oedipus's problems, right? These are our problems.
And this is really where the myth gets so personal. The central thing driving Oedipus was his relentless, almost stubborn insistence on knowing the truth about himself, no matter how bad it was. May saw this as a perfect mirror for our own deep-seated need for self-knowledge, our own struggle to figure out where we come from and who we're supposed to be.
So when Oedipus finally learns the horrific truth that he's killed his father and married his mother, he puts out his own eyes. Now, it's a brutal physical act, of course, but May interprets it as something deeply symbolic. It represents this denial of awareness, right? The wish to literally unsee a truth that's just too painful to live with.
But, and this is so important, the story doesn't end there, in all that tragedy and denial. This is where the true power of the myth really kicks in. The whole narrative moves beyond the trauma, and it ultimately shows us a path toward healing and some profound understanding.
You see, as an old man, exiled and blind, Oedipus has time to reflect on his life's tragedy. And he doesn't just wallow in it. He contemplates his suffering, he accepts his part in it, and through that whole process, he finally achieves this sense of peace and understanding and even grace.
So what this really shows us is that the myth of Oedipus gives us a complete narrative arc. It shows us that even after the most devastating truths come to light, there's a path forward through reflection, acceptance, and putting it all together. It's almost like a template for our own healing.
And for those of you who might be familiar with psychology, this might be ringing a bell. May's whole concept of myths is actually very similar to Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious. They're both pointing to these universal archetypal patterns that are just woven into the fabric of human experience, transcending any single individual life.
So,
what does this all mean for us right here, right now? Well, according to May, we're standing at a crossroads. We face this really fundamental choice. We can either embrace these universal guiding stories, or we can deny them and just pretend we don't need them.
And the consequences of that choice, they're pretty stark. Embracing myths, in May's view, leads to psychological growth, a sense of meaning, and a feeling of unity with our culture and with all of humanity. But denying them, well, that path leads straight to alienation, apathy, and a profound sense of emptiness.
And May did not mince words about the stakes here. He was very clear that these feelings, alienation, apathy, and emptiness, they aren't just unpleasant moods. He said they are the principal ingredients of psychological illness. So to live without myths is to live in a state of real, spiritual, and psychological danger.
And that brings us to the final and maybe most essential question that this whole idea leaves us with. If myths really are the invisible support beams holding our lives together, what are yours? What are the foundational stories, the unconscious beliefs that give your life structure and meaning and make it habitable?